Game Designer in Progress, Episode 2 for June 1st, 2011, Gardner. Hi everyone, thanks for stopping by. Moldcraft continues to march on and it's been a great last 2 weeks. For my last sprint, I wanted to add more interesting choices, get at least one playtest in, and optionally add moisture as a resource if I felt I had extra time. Things worked out a bit unexpectedly. I made progress on my first goal, but those interesting choices aren't quite where I want them to be yet. I did get a playtest in, and I got lots of great feedback. Also, ironically, I managed to add that new resource, moisture, almost by accident, and I want to talk about that first. In my original prototype, moisture was something you had to keep up or you wouldn't be able to act. It was sort of like stamina in Metal Gear Solid 3 or food in other games. Important, but not a very active resource. I wanted to keep the same feel of stamina, but make it far more active and useful. I asked myself 2 questions. What does moisture mean in this game? And what is its relationship to the player? First off, I wanted it to be malleable. Unlike stamina, you can shift it around anywhere. The player is responsible for allocating this effectively, so it's doing the most work where it can. It's under constant threat from enemies in the environment. Since it's always being ticked down a little bit, it's also the player's job to do upkeep, getting moisture from other sources to maintain it when it's getting too low. I realized almost immediately after my last video that I already had moisture in the game. Health actually served the exact same purpose, and it had all the dynamics I already wanted. It's player allocated through the Queen's abilities, it's constantly under threat from enemies in the environment, and if the unit loses it all, it dies and can't act anymore. I still needed a source of moisture though, and I evaluated what I already had. Vespane geysers give you nutrients, so I made another geyser called a steam geyser to provide moisture pellets to heal the Queen, who can then distribute the health to others. You build extractors of different types on each, and they give you the right resources in return. In the prototype, they represent nutrient and moisture nodes that you'll mine as a mold. They also highlight the function of each. Nutrients are your currency. You use them to plant the seed, so to speak. Moisture, on the other hand, brings the seed to its full potential. You use it to make it grow. How does this work mechanically? In my prototype, units now start with very low health, and the player grows them to full health. So let's look at how this works. The player has to contend with enemies, so she builds some units. She gives some of her health to the units to fill them up. She then takes health from her enemies to fill herself up. Likewise, new enemies bring down the health of the player's units, and the cycle begins all over again. This is a different paradigm from how I started. I started with creep tumors born at full health that died slowly over time. It's not a good feeling to have to keep something from dying versus bringing something to its full potential. When I shifted to positive growth, I felt a much stronger feeling of progress overall than I did, that I think was a very good move. Adding more interesting choices was tough. This goal ended up being a little too broad for a single sprint, but I did make some progress toward it. I changed the terrain from a wide open space with a straight line from beginning to end to a light maze with a goal at the end. I drew a rather random map on my whiteboard, then filled in walls and possible paths through it. I later edited my original concept to bring some more linearity to the beginning and more choices later on. From the whiteboard prototype, I built this map with moisture and nutrient nodes scattered throughout the path. I've also added some additional enemies you face that would give the player more trouble as she progressed toward the end. These would provide more interesting threats that would add to the challenge of the game. But I was starting to get uneasy about all of these new enemies. I realized that my challenges were all combat-based, and I wondered, is this too combat-heavy? This is really the kind of question only a playtest can answer. The purpose of any prototype is to answer a specific question. I didn't go in with a specific enough question, and it's part of the reason I've been fumbling more than perhaps I should be. But thinking back, I think my question might have been, can you build a positive experience on top of expansion alone? I was lucky enough to get to torture one of my friends with the old version of the game, where creep tumors died slowly, to find out more about this idea, and I got some very good feedback. The luring dynamic, which I initially liked, got boring after a while. Likewise, the growth action, where you plant, move, got really repetitive. Eventually, he let old creeps near his base die off. This is a tactic I used as well, but he said it didn't feel right, like you weren't supposed to do it. It didn't fit in with the theme. The new positive growth mechanic might help alleviate this a bit. Worse, though, was the balance was way off. If you didn't play a perfect game, you wouldn't end up with enough resources to end the game. He got to the end, blew everything on the final battle, and didn't have any nutrients left for his last extractor. While the playtest was a success, it showed how much of a work in progress the prototype really is. So to answer my question, can you build a positive experience on expansion alone? The answer is definitely no, at least not for this game. But likewise, I learned that adding more and different kinds of combat is not really the final solution either. It's got to be deeper than that. The one thing I could control immediately without changing the basic mechanics was pacing, which I learned felt far too slow. I stumbled upon an interesting solution that I discovered almost entirely by accident. I was building a god mode where debugging things that triggered when the queen got near. I'd start up god mode, and God, every time it's like when I start this up. Okay, hold on. All right, so the queen, when you start up god mode, the queen gets super regen and super speed for testing anything related to proximity. I noticed that the speed increase made her spider-like and really creepy. You can see in this video how she has this jerky motion when she moves around. It's pretty cool looking. Kind of like The Ring or some kind of like ghost. Something weird like that. I like this a lot, so I ran with it. I added improved speed across the board. Movement speed on creep was increased slightly, and creep growth was also increased. Both of these made the pacing much more enjoyable. Growth speed, especially, will definitely be an important control on game and level pacing in the final product. The process reminded me of something Kevin Kelly once wrote about discovery and invention. He said, to find something is the same as making it. To make something is the same as finding it. We tend to think that natural forms are discovered while artificial forms are invented, but when stripped to its essentials, the path to arriving at a novel natural form is exactly the same journey as arriving at a novel artificial form. For game design, that means that design is both discovery and invention. These two things are interchangeable. Will Wright discovered SimCity as much as he designed it. Although for me, I find design almost entirely a process of discovery. These game worlds are already there. I'm just discovering and I'm just uncovering what's possible in each of them. I like to compare game design to gardening, because like a gardener, you can't really exert direct control over what you get. You can plant the seeds, you can care for them a certain way, but really all you can do is hope that you set up the right conditions for it to blossom. You're discovering what's already there and nurturing what you find to get the experience that you want. The cool part, and something I've tried to capture in these videos, is getting to watch it grow over time. My next sprint is going to be 3 weeks instead of 2. I've got a new gig and some new responsibilities, so I want to give myself as much time as I can to make this sprint the best one so far. For number 1, I'm worried that the RTS engine is getting in the way of my design. I want to make an engaging prototype with nutrients, moisture, and growth, but no combat, which will force me down some different paths, and I think that'll be very good for me. Number 2, I want to get in 1 playtest a week to constantly check to see if I'm on the right track with these ideas. I want to make sure to test the positive growth mechanic and the combatless growth experience at least once. If you've got any feedback for me or you'd like to share some of your own prototypes or artwork, send me a link or an attachment at matt@hungrygamer.net. If you're working on anything related to games, I would love to share it with everyone. Send any comments you have to my email. You can follow me on Twitter at hungryfilmmaker, and please visit me on the web. My blog is hungrygamer.net, where I link to tons of great reading on games and game design, and please check out my portfolio site at mattagnello.com. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in 3 weeks.